Thank you so much for joining SheBoss today. You are in for a treat. Trust me when I say that. We are joined by Kristin Scroggin with genWHY Communications. And Kristin is so in tune with differences in generations and how that can impact things in the workplace, but also it can be a lifesaver when it comes to parenting a little bit too, which I'm excited to talk about. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm excited to be here. We'll have a great time.
We will. I'm excited about it. So you started genWHY Communications a couple of years ago, but prior to that, you were a communications professor at UH for a long time.
I was.
And we are a little bit biased here at Flourish. We have a passion for communications in a variety of ways. But just talk to us a little bit about your background and how you kind of got into where you are today, and then we'll dive into what you're working on.
Sure. So weirdly, my dad was a professor at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, where I was raised, and he was a debate coach there. So he was in communications even way back then. And as hard as we tried not to duplicate our parents' path, we very much end up doing very similar things. So it was interesting growing up. Like, we never had rules. Everything was on the table, worth an argument. So everything was about communication, being able to talk your way around it from multiple areas. So when I started at UA at Montevallo, where I went to undergraduate, I was going to be a very famous Broadway star, and then I realized that I didn't want to be poor. And so I realized very fast that I would be poor because I was nowhere near as good as I thought I was. So I ended up switching into a communications class because it was the first positive thing anyone had told me in about 2 years. That someone said I spoke like a Kennedy. And it was because I'd been a music and theater kid, and all they did was tell me I was trash for a while. So I got a little bit of good, and then I was in communications, and then I went to my graduate school at Alabama, and then I was able to get an internship at Calhoun, literally helping teach the communication classes there. So before long, I just kind of fell into teaching. I feel like I was born to be a teacher anyway, and really what I do every day is teach. I just teach huge groups of adults instead of small groups of people. But that's how I kind of fell into communications, and I loved being a teacher. I loved everything about it. The pay is trash. People really underestimate how bad it is, even at the college level.
Yeah.
Every student I had made more money than I did, but it's cool. But during that time, I started studying millennials and trying to figure out why they were so different, because I had this great plan and I was just going to make them love me. And if they loved me, they were going to work super hard, and I was going to get all the acclaim, and that is not what was happening. So it was like, oh, it's cool, Scruggsy loves us, and she'll hook us up. And so I was getting all the trash work. So that's how I kind of fell into studying millennials, was to figure out how to get them to maximum capacity. Yeah. And then before long, everyone in Huntsville was coming to me and saying, what do you know that we don't know?
How did you do that? Yeah. Yeah.
And then it just took off. And so now, last year, I was in 43 different states. I worked with about I'd say at least 23, 24 different industries. So the good news is that it's not just an Alabama thing. It's people are weird everywhere they go. So, and every industry is a little bit mad.
Right.
Yeah.
The portfolio of clients that you've supported and the amount of countries and people that you've touched is so broad, which is insane. But I want to go back to something that you mentioned. So I share a love of debate. That was a debate class in college, was a catalyst for me. I don't know what it was, but it was something that just like gave me a voice that I didn't know I had. So I could see how that could kind of, especially embedded at a young age, could help you kind of see a different path in life. And knowing that you need to, finding the confidence to find your own voice.
Yeah, and I think it taught me the idea of argumentation, that you don't have to even have a real emotional attachment to something to be able to play the devil's advocate and make sure that you're doing that. And a lot of what I do is saying, like, I don't know exactly how you're feeling as a boomer, as a Gen Xer, but let me play devil's advocate. What if it is just the person being a person?
Right.
And it's not somebody that's just a jerk?
Yeah. Well, and I think having sympathy and understanding the other side is so important. Yeah. And we were just talking before about kids. And, I have 3, you have 4. And, always trying to make them understand the other side of the coin is so important. But going back to your dad teaching you that at a very young age, what were some of the arguments and debates that you won that you're like,
so I consistently was able to out-argue things about going out because my dad would always do the whole, well, if everybody else was jumping off a bridge, then why would you jump off the bridge? And you don't need to be like everybody else and that sort of stuff. So I was always able to kind of come around from the tack of like social growth is important, and that based on my personality, I need to make my own mistakes. And so I need to go in and occasionally be best friends with somebody that's going to throw me under the bus long term, so that I learn how to spot that in people later on. So I was able to talk my way around a lot of stuff like that. The other thing that was an advantage is that my mother taught gifted and talented first and second graders. And so all the praise for me was never on being smart, it was on being creative. It was always about finding the other thing. So she didn't care if I got an A, she was interested in, did you do a cooler project than everybody else?
Yeah.
So that was sort of the combination of those two things, being able to articulate what you're thinking in a non-emotional way, and then come at it from a creative way that other people aren't looking at, kind of gave me, I think, the brain to look at generations in a very different way than most people do.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
What a powerful thing to just grow up with that embedded in your DNA.
You had two parents who were taught in early childhood education, so they were able to implement those rules early on in their life.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing with genWHY.
Okay.
So genWHY Communications, of course, in preparation for this interview and just us watching you from behind the scenes in the periphery in Huntsville, you have exploded with your business, and it has just taken off. And I remember a comment that was made a couple of months ago where you were pretty much booked for the entire year at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
So we're very, very fortunate he's here today.
It was like the one day left in September that I had.
And we were going to snag it. So appreciative of your time.
Yeah.
I know it's very, very valuable. But talk to us just a little bit about some of the big things that most businesses are coming to you for. How do they know that they're having a challenge with generational differences? And I love this quote where you're sort of, you've been called the stand-up HR comedian.
Yeah.
Which I love so much, because what you'll see if you haven't already is that Kristin uses humor to very eloquently deliver a message that is so impactful. But how did people discover a problem and then be able to come find you? Like what are some of the things that they experience that really is that driver to engage with you?
Yeah, so I think early on, so I don't know how much I'm sure in what you do, you touch generational stuff anyway, because it's such a part of marketing.
Yeah.
But I think that millennials and Gen Zs are actually very different. And so I've had to kind of evolve in my approaches on this. Very much originally with the millennials, it was the idea of, we don't know how to give them purpose. They're over ambitious. They think that they can be the president of the company within 3 weeks of being here. And so the original things that I was hearing complaints about was more about personality clashes, which actually makes a lot of sense, because in reality, baby boomers and millennials are very similar, and they're in a natural power struggle, and that's why they fight all the time. And Gen Xers walk around every day like, oh my God, Marsha, right? Like, we hate all of you, and we still do our work. Why are you fighting about nose rings and purple hair streaks, right? So they're actually very, very similar. So at the beginning, it was very much the boomer versus millennial. It was like having the child that's very similar to you be in an argument with everything. Yeah. So millennials were really trying to flip rules and question things and ask why. And so a lot of the first realm was getting them to understand that people aren't doing it to fight against you. And it was more about just promoting understanding. Well, then the deeper we got into the millennials and the front end of the Gen Zs, there's a lot of research that says Gen Zs are far more focused on the money than the purpose, which is funny because you don't hear that a lot. But
the other way around.
100% what's happening. So people swung too far towards purpose, and then they started dropping behind on the money. And then the Gen Zs came in and said, I don't care about your purpose, show me the money. And then everybody was like, how dare you talk to us like that, right? And the millennials were like, how dare you think that you should make as much money as I do? The same things that they were complaining about 10 years before. So it's really fun. The millennials hate the Gen Zs with the same passion that I, as a Zennial, hated the millennials with. So you're always going to hate your little brother just a little bit. Yeah. So I think there really people are doing different things, but now the turnover rate, the bounce rate is so high. People are having a hard time even getting, I'd say the younger side of millennials and then the older side of Gen Zs to stay even past that 18-month mark. That a lot of what I hear now is, how do I secure more people? And so one of the things that I've been pushing lately is, you need to do a better job with leadership development. And there's no point in having a succession plan if you don't have a big vat of humans who have all been trained to become future leaders. So that's one of the things we're kind of pushing right now, is the idea of you have to upskill. And that means you're going to have to upskill socially also. And so
elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so the social upskill. So I don't know the word. So if succession plan is the word of 2024, then I think executive functioning skills will be the word of 2025.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it's very much the idea of listening effectively, resolving your own conflict, having self-motivation, being able to manage your own time, inspiration, that sort of self-inspire. So that's where I see there's kind of a hole with a lot of the Gen Zs is they don't have a lot of those executive functioning skills in place. And because by their nature, they're actually less face-to-face confrontational than millennials are very confrontational. They brave here and they're brave here. Gen Zs have only broken up with people over the phone, right? So they're not as face-to-face confrontational. So you have a lot more ghosting happening, right? Yeah. So what's happening is that millennials would tell you, I'm unhappy and I don't like this, and if you don't do what I want you, then I'm going to quit. And now Gen Zs are just like, deuces, I'm out, and I'm not even going to give you a 2-week notice. Yeah. So it's a different set of problems, even though they are in this exact same generation.
Let me ask that question. So with that being said, where do you sort of see the longer term implications coming with stuff like that? Because I understand it and I get it, but how will that evolve into something either greater or worse for that individual?
It's going to be an issue. I mean, that we're seeing that already, right? And actually, that's why gig economy was so successful. Is you had so many people who said, "Forget this. I'm obviously not good at working for any human ever. Right. So I'm just going to DoorDash and sell crap on eBay." Right? Like they've been able to figure it out, and that's great long term. But it means businesses have to pivot now. Yeah. Because now the old school rules that were 80 years old now you've got a generation of people who parents are perfectly fine letting you stay as long as possible in the basement, and you've got the gig economy where you can make enough money to live and work completely your own hours, your own time, and your own clothing. So there's a pivot point where we're at, where businesses are having to really reevaluate what rules. Like I tell companies all the time, like, do you really want to die on this hill? Right? Do you really want to die on whether people can have flip-flops on or not? Like, you need human beings in here, and you need their brain. So is a purple streak worth an argument? Yeah. So there's a pivot point happening there. The big thing that's coming, though, is the Gen Alphas who are about to come up the back end. So Gen Alphas, just to give you guys a bit of perspective, Gen Alphas, the start line of them is seniors in high school right now, right? So a new group is coming, and they are drastically different. And the big thing we see on Gen Alphas is that they are obsessed with money. They're terrified of debt in any shape, form, or fashion. We've seen that that's actually linked to the fact that their parents, they were little kids. The front end of them were little kids during the Great Recession, and then COVID hit for the younger side. So all the fear that parents have talked about around them and things that they can't control are always linked up to money. So now you've got a generation of people who has no intention on spending $250,000 on a college degree and never making more than $60K.
Right.
So you already have a labor shortage, even though with the biggest generation ever, and then you've got a way smaller generation coming in behind them who's not going to get the college degrees that all these companies have been requiring for all this time. So one of the things I've been pushing hard is you need a pipeline. You need a pipeline from your high school to your company where they can go literally at 18, 19, 20, 21 and start doing some of those low-level administrative positions. Let's just find out if they're teachable, tolerable, working humans, and then you can go back and decide whether you want to help them get a college degree or not, really how important it is. But I think you'll see a lot more certified apprenticeships, a lot more internships. Any company, honestly, at this point that can build a line from high school directly into their organization is going to get far ahead of the industries that continue to require not only degrees but certifications.
Right. Well, and I love that the Gen Alpha, right, so driven with AI being part of their life. And so, I mean, they're I hate to say this, especially
I get it.
Professor for so long, but do you need to go to college for?
I have 4 children. My oldest one went to college when he didn't need to go, and he's lucked out. He's false forward, right? He's the lucky kid in our house. He should have debt through the nose, but he was able to get a scholarship in a different way. But like my senior in high school, she's freaking out because everybody's running around talking about college, and I'm like, you don't need to do this. I don't know why would you need to do this? Why don't you go be an au pair? You're not even a full grown human, right? Like, why don't you go see the world for a little while? Why don't you go over to Huntsville Hospital and get a radiology tech, the most in-demand job that you can get the whole degree for $5,000, and go start doing that, and then figure out if there's anything else in medical you want to do, or like just go a cheaper route. There's no reason to go spend $20,000 to figure out I really hate English.
Right.
More than life.
Right. Agreed.
Right?
Yeah.
In your first year.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely, as someone who was a prof, I'm still coming in on the back end with my own kids and saying, I'm not 100% sure you need to do this. But what I hear from a lot of parents when I say that is, well, they need the college experience. And I say, okay, that's cool and all, but that's a $200,000 college experience, right? Like, couldn't you just give them a little more freedom? Maybe help them out in a different way.
Yeah.
Let them live with you during that time. If you're just worried about that. But I just am not sure the idea of partying in college and that holds the relevance, and it's definitely not worth. It doesn't pay off at the expense rate right now.
And I think some of the trends that you're seeing are not leaning towards that life experience anyway. Like drinking has gone down, and all of these things have declined significantly. And my daughter is at Alabama, and she's not digging it. She is not her jam at all. And it pains me to pay that bill every single year and to think about what graduate school will be, and all of that. And it's not a good experience for
I won't pay for my kids' college. Even through when we were in school, I would say I'm not going to pay for this, because I had so many students that would come through, and when they had a complete free ride, they weren't interested in learning anything at all. It was just about the experience and that sort of stuff. And so, what they don't know is I'm happy to help them on the back end, but I'm not going to help them on the front end. I need them to be panicked about every dropped class. So that long term, they drop fewer classes.
I like that strategy.
Yeah, I might in real life help you, but I'm not. You got to get through it first.
Yeah. Well, and then they've got skin in the game as well on those decisions that they're making, and they've got a little bit more control over their own path and journey, which gets them vested in that. So
and I think that's a lot of, when you're talking about replacing skills, long-term fallout. I think a lot of parents that really go in on the idea of my number one job is to turn you into a decent human being, not to be your best friend, not to coddle you, not to love you, not to even make you happy all the time, to make sure that for the whole because listen to me, your children, I'm not talking to them now, your children are children for this long, they're adults for this long. Right? So we want to make sure that we get as many skills into them as children so that they have a chance to make it as adults. And I think there's been kind of a pivot point where we've lost that, and a lot of companies are now suffering and having to upskill on things that parents didn't do. And I hear that all the time, Megan. People will say, well, the parents should have taught them. Well, they didn't. So I don't know what to tell you. Either you're going to upskill them or you're going to continue being mad. So your choice.
Whew, man. So let's talk about what is happening in 2030.
Oh, yeah.
Because that, just in reading through some of the things that you've been talking about, so that's a big year that's been a little bit looming, for industry as a whole. So share with us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a massive pivot point. I think, when you even look at, so there's some people named Strauss and Howell, they're historians, and they're kind of the kings of generational theory. And, right around when this 2030 stuff happens, we're at the peak of redefining what the next version of work in America is going to look like, the cycle that happens over and over and over again. So 2030 is a big year on what ends up happening. Do we mold? But also you've got so many of the boomers they're going to be gone.
Hitting retirement.
They're going to be gone. Like, it's not even about retirement. 38% of baby boomers said they plan to die at their desk anyway. So retirement for 38% of the people is not even on the table. But eventually, they're going to have a hard time getting to their building, right? And we know they're not going to take an Uber because they're convinced those people are going to kill them. So like just the idea of, and I watched them, you did too, during COVID, I watched some of your older boomers that could not make any of their software function, and so I'm thinking holographs in 2030 are going to be out of the question. So like there's just basic things that they're not going to be able to do. The AI is going to outpace almost everybody and what they think is going to happen. So, that shift that's coming where the millennials are 100% they're going to be in charge. And it's really going to probably happen in the next 7 years. Yeah. And then Gen Zs, right, like me and you, we're walking, like I tell people all the time, stop looking at your Gen Zs for being your next big leaders. We're going to sell all our grandma's china and move to Costa Rica. Like, we're not working till we die, right? 57 is the number that I hear consistently most Gen Xers want out. So, so it's that succession plan, right? The train that's coming, and that's why part of why that 2030 is such a big looming number. Boomers will be out. Gen Xers will be right behind them. And then we've got so many millennials that are not ready to move into upper middle management, much less moving into top management positions in the next 7 years. Yeah. So you've got all these companies that have 10-year plans, and none of them are considering the generational shift that's going to happen.
Oh my God. Are there any, I would imagine it's across the board.
Across the board. Doesn't matter the industry.
Industries, okay.
I think that I'm finding there's some industries that are having a little harder pain points at this point. Utilities is having a hard time because their gap is significant between the two. Utilities is definitely struggling a little bit. I think you've got certain groups that are so built into an old school world, like higher education, for example. Government is really having, but what I'm seeing is there are states in particular that I work with that are taking what I say and the research that they're finding, and they are moving and shaking. Alaska's dropping tons of requirements for college degrees, left and right, to be able to work for the state, because they need the human beings, they need the pipeline. So there's quite a few states that I'm seeing that are making their pivot points, and they're doing it way faster. But then you've got old school states that are still run by a lot of old school people who are like, no, we will make them conform. And so I keep saying, no, but you won't. The pain's going to be really real in 10 years. So government definitely is having hassle. Banking's behind the curve. Law's struggling. We're finding fewer and fewer people go, especially your young people, especially younger millennials with a high moral compass, are having a hard time justifying the moral choices that have to be made as lawyers.
Well, and you think about just the cultural and societal differences in those generations, even in political views and things like, which play huge into the world of law.
Exactly. So you're seeing some slippage there. Architects are starting to having a hard time scrambling. I've done a lot of weird stuff with architects and landscape architects in particular across the country. Who would have thought that was even a thing? But
I would also assume this is the case, but do you see differences from the United States and then internationally?
Yes.
Or are this
huge?
Very
so
similar?
You can't pick up, so all the research that I do is like, even in my surveys, it says, did you live in America from years 1 to 12? Like, you have to be in a U.S. for it to cleanly fit, because every country has their own wars, their own economy, their own pop culture, their own parenting trends, school differences. So that's really what shapes a generation. So, like, you can't take, if you have an employee, for example, that was raised in China, even though they might have been here in America for the past 25 years, they still have high cultural overlay. Right? So I found it's actually very difficult. Every country has their own sort of cycles, what each generation is made up of, but their numbers don't correlate. So the more collectivistic, the more socialistic a community is, like in a lot of Asian cultures, a lot of South Europe, right? You've got a lot of that more collectivistic. We pool our money, we put all our resources together. So you have a lot more of that, and they are like 2 generations behind. Their millennials function like our younger boomers.
Interesting. Huh.
Because you have all the filial propriety and the social rules and respecting your elders. And so you see that sort of backed up. But the more independent a culture is, the faster their wheels turn.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fascinating. But
there's so many weird things.
Yeah. And so many things that I think you just don't think about on a regular basis. And
right.
And also, too, when you think about long-term strategy, right, and how you're planning, especially from a business perspective, like, there has to be a huge variable that's associated.
It's a massive variable, and you can't go too far in any one direction. Right. So I think we saw COVID as a great example, where everybody started, we're going to go double down on getting millennials, and we're going to build lunch rooms in our buildings, and we're going to have ping pong tables and sleep pods. Yeah. And now those same millennials they built them for have no intention of walking back into that office again ever. So. the money, like you can't go swinging too far in any one direction.
Yeah.
You just need to make small pivot points.
So let me ask you this, and then we're going to switch topics just a little bit. How do you, thinking about Gen Alpha, right? How do you, someone in your position, how do you anticipate what some of those behaviors might be 10 years from now? I would imagine that's a very challenging thing.
It's very hard.
Historical generations, right? And you can kind of use that a bit. But
oh yeah, you've got a lot of that sort of backspin. So like, I hear people complaining about Gen Zs all the time right now, and I'm thinking, okay, so think about your people in the 1930s. They were idolizing mobsters. They were They were super violent. They were, showing their knees. You know what I mean? Like the same things we're complaining about Gen Zs. The big thing that I would say here is it depends on if there's a catastrophic event for the alphas, how they pivot. So what's always happened in America before is right around where we are in the fourth turning, there's always been a war. We're babies compared to the rest of the world. So other people have had pandemics, social crashes, things like that. But America's always had a war. So I say very often, yeah, I can make estimations on how alpha's going to go if there's not a war that comes in and changes everything. And this version of war would look significantly different than any other version of war that we've had at this point. Because again, you've got the ability to, the cybersecurity side. It's the cyber side where it would be, I would, from what, and I had so many great cybersecurity students that taught me tons at UAH, but they would say things like it's the civilians who will have pain in another world war. It'll be the civilians who can't, the electricity grid goes down, or it won't be just your son's going to get picked up and sent off to Afghanistan in the same sort of way. It'll be how do you
your money.
You can't access your money, or just think about how a few months ago when we were all stuck in airports for almost a week,
everything shut down.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that it really depends on, I can make estimations assuming everything continues in basic the path that it is right now. But if there's a big thing that happens, then it resets it all, which is what's always happened in America.
Right. So this is a good segue into something I'm curious about your opinion on, especially as a mother of four. You're also a foster parent too,
yes,
which is just so I'm just in
hardest job I've ever done in my whole entire life.
We had Lee Marshall here last week.
Yeah, she's my bestie.
She is the best, and what an amazing interview. And we're doing Over the Edge, so we're super pumped about that. But I could go on forever about her. But I want to go back to, I think about my 11-year-old who, wants to be a YouTube star and all those things. And he's like, oh, well, I saw it on the internet, so therefore it must be true, right? What's your perspective on how, technology has advanced so quickly, our brains have not been able to keep up with that.
Correct.
And you're seeing so much around mental health and anxiety and depression and all of these things. What have you sort of learned in a lot of your research about how far we've come versus how far we cannot keep up, and how that's impacting from a mental health perspective? Is there any correlation there that you've seen a lot in your research?
Yeah, I think the problem is that, by your nature, you always think it could be better, like as humans, right? Like you forget how good of a world that you actually live in. Like for hundreds of years, nobody had a warm shower. Right? So the idea that you can just stand there in a warm shower is pretty darn good. As far you could cook your food in a microwave, right? You don't have to spend 8 hours, or wash your clothes in 30 minutes. So I think that's part of the problem is that we always think that things could be better and more efficient, and we don't enjoy any of the things that we're not thankful for what we have. So that's sort of the first kind of weird pivot point that I would say there. The other side is that you have young people who are they do think they can all be YouTube stars. Because again, I call that the Bieber effect, right? The idea of one person did it, and so now everybody thinks that they can do it. But then there are people that are literally making fortunes off of gaming and stream and things like that. With my kids, and I guess I can only really come from my perspective, I spend a lot of time kind of pooping on that dream, right? I say a lot of like, you're more likely to be hit by lightning than to become a famous influencer, right? So I have a tendency to say, like, that's cool if you want to do that on the side, but you should always have that in your brain as a side hustle, not necessarily as your main life. I spend a lot of time with my kids talking about life purpose and what are you made to be? What are you uniquely designed to be? So, like, for example, with our younger two boys who are adopted out of foster care, and they're both Black Americans. And so, you know, one of the things we have, because we look different everywhere we go. It's white parents with Black children, and people are like, right? And they're confused every time. And so from the time we've been very young, it's always been, just because it's weird to people doesn't mean it's bad, right? So that's sort of our conversation. But we tell them, you were born with the specific DNA that you have to be able to accomplish whatever your life purpose is. We believe we were designed to parent you to get you to that, but you have your DNA for a reason, right? And so our goal is to help you figure out what that is and go be awesome in that way. So I think that that's where a lot of parents are kind of slipping, right? Is they're not having those hard conversations with their kids and saying, yeah, sure, I mean, it might magically work out and you be an influencer. I'm not saying that you can't go for that to some degree, but what are the other 6 things that you can do?
Yeah.
Right? You know, what are some other talented things what are other options that debate mine? Right? What are other options that you could do? There's 1,000 ways to make money. I tell my children that all the time. There's 1,000 ways to make money. So I think that would be one of the parenting fronts that I would say is part of making sure that your kid doesn't end up just being somebody who is always trying to make it and never actually launches, is to let them see that they have multiple capabilities, multiple talents. Highlight them. When they do something really awesome in an interesting way, especially if you can't do it.
Yeah.
Especially if you can't do it, right? When, for example, my youngest he's just the kind one. He's the sweet one. He sees when other people feel left out. He sees that, and my nature is to come in and dominate the thing and make sure everybody else is having fun. So I go out of my way to say, hey, KK, that was really super kind of you to let that person eat first, or you choose not to play on the video game so that your friend could do. Like, that's really kind. And kindness translates into all kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
Right? When you have a natural heart for things. So
that's really sweet.
From a parenting standpoint, that's what I would say is find their holes. Don't discourage them and tell them that they can never ever do these kind of things, because it kind of makes them want more.
Right.
But the odds are so low. Just even like my son Zach is a really talented. He's a beautiful athlete. He's gorgeous. He is a 12-year-old who is 6 foot tall and a size 14 shoe, and he looks good in pads already. Right? He plays on a varsity team already. So, but at the same time, I tell them, your odds of being a professional football player are very low. So let's find something else that you love that you can develop skill in at the same time.
I love the series that you guys are doing about what would you call it, about ruining our kids.
Maybe you didn't ruin your kids.
I know, and I'm like, but that's the whole series title is maybe you didn't ruin your kids.
Yeah.
My husband and I are constantly having those conversations where I'm like, where did we go wrong?
Yeah.
How did we, and I, again, in preparation for this, so many of the things that are always in my mind, you have hit spot on, where it's like, I was legitimately told to not come home until the sun was setting, right? And, there was no filtered water and all of those types of things, and absolutely a latchkey kid by all means,
me too.
And now it's like my son has to FaceTime me every 15 minutes to tell me, which I love at the same time. It's so different.
I do. I spend a lot of time looking at him and say, why do you want to talk to me? I don't really want to talk to you.
It's interesting. It's just so different, but it cracked me up about that.
I'm excited about this series because that's one of the things that people come to me every single presentation that I'm done and said, I love learning this from my company, but it really helped me with my kids.
Yeah.
And how can, and people say, when are you going to write a parenting book? And I'm not a parenting expert, so that's scary to me to do.
I think that's exactly why you should write it.
Yeah. Even with this lesson, right, I'm coming at it from the angle, I'm not trying to tell you what to do with your kids. I'm just saying, here's the impact, here's the forces on them.
Yeah.
Like the one that we just went through was about, when you remove the after school job, so many lessons about doing things that you don't want to do got wiped, right? Because you don't need to have the money and you don't have to go out to see your friends to still have a good time. And it changes things, it pivots things. And so now you've got a generation of people who are coming in without the 16-year-old lessons.
Yeah.
And so now you're teaching 24-year-olds, right? You're looking at people with 4.0s from Alabama, Auburn in engineering, and you're like, but why are you still stupid? Right? Why? How are you still stupid?
Yeah.
And they're like, it's not 15 minutes isn't late. And you're like, but boo, it is, right? Like,
yeah.
I'm sorry that you didn't learn that earlier, but this is the line, and that line has to be drawn.
Right. I will say, learning several things from you and your research, and Kristin's website is amazing, has a ton of resources on it. But it's, I find myself, and I'll just be completely honest, I find myself when we do interviews at times, and we interview students who are coming out of college often, and when they don't have a notepad when they come in. And you mentioned on that
that yellow notepad. Yellow notepad, easiest thing in the world to bring. Bring it with you, even if you never write on it.
Even if you never write on it. But I had a lot of I had a lot of anger around things like that at times, and I never really understood it. And my natural inclination was, they're lazy, they're not paying attention, they're not. That's not the case at all. It's not the case at all. And I really had to step back and really check my ego a little bit on that, because I didn't. Again, it's just understanding.
It is
making sure that you understand both sides of the equation and not being as judgmental to just quickly, cast an opinion on someone.
Yeah, and I think we have a tendency to do that. I'm the right version and you're the wrong version.
Right.
On pretty much everything.
Maybe just because I'm older.
Just because I'm older.
Which is not true.
No. I mean, I'll give you just a weird example. When I was a professor, everything about ChatGPT terrified me. Because it was like, they're not going to learn and they're not going to do anything and that kind of stuff. And now every time I write an email, right, and I know that I have to be professional, I will go to ChatGPT and be like, here's the thing I really want to say it in a way that's not going to get me sued, right? But I'm telling you, I will mention that to boomers and Gen Xers in ways that they can use that, and they're like, oh my God, that's like cheating. And I'm like, no, that's like making your life easier.
Right.
So I think that willingness to be agile and mobile, and we're not in a world anymore where it's just us teaching lessons to them. They have a lot that they can teach us.
Oh, absolutely.
They might say every third word when they say it, which might get on your nerves, but it doesn't mean that what they've said is not true.
Yeah.
So I think it's very much making peace with the fact that in many ways that outpacing of technology is putting them on levels of things that you need. And I tell people all the time, don't be mad that someone doesn't have social adaptability and then you refuse to learn how to convert a PDF.
Right.
Right? If we're all learning, then we're all learning, boo.
Right.
So, that's one of the big things that I've been kind of focused on here lately is, how do you upskill? What kind of leadership development programs are you putting into place to undergird that and make sure that they're progressing?
I will say I'm proud to say that I think I have learned just as much from those who are younger than me than I have
That's
those
great.
that are older. And the group that we have here are phenomenal, and I always learn something from them. I tell them that all the time. They run circles around me in many, many ways,
Absolutely.
And I hope that can be a good balance.
Absolutely.
Where it's, understanding that.
Well, you outsource certain parts, right? Where you just say, okay, that my brain doesn't do that, so I'm just, so-and-so's brain is totally into that, so I'm just going to outsource that to them, and then you give me a report. And it doesn't have to be competition.
No.
It doesn't always have to be me versus them, and to show that they're too big for their britches.
Right.
No.
Agreed.
Their britches are big. They know how to do things.
Exactly.
Right.
So we're going to end on a fun note too,
Sure.
because I learned that you are a bit of a Disney planning queen.
You know all the secrets now.
Which I've never once taken my kids to Disney because I'm like, I just can't deal with all of the stuff. So talk to us just a little bit about that and how you got involved in being such a
Oh my gosh. So this is the real truth. You're getting real truth here. So my husband is a supply chain management, product placement. That's his thing. He is a pencil neck geek. He does nerd stuff, right, all day long, and I'm sort of the creative. And so because I love variations, I'll bring my lunch and not even eat that lunch, right? Because I change my mind all the time. When we went to Disney for the first time, he looked at it as a puzzle. It was a system to be beaten, right? How do we make fast pass and maximum our time and our money and that sort of stuff? And so once he sort of figured out the system and started being able to beat the system and having a better time than everybody after 2 or 3, that is the only vacation he wanted to take. So because again, he doesn't like change, he doesn't like new. And so I started a Disney blog at the time purely so that I wouldn't be bored out of my mind going to Disney. So I started going on the hunt for how do you stretch a meal for one person into a meal for 3 people, or what's the best bathroom that you can go to that has the least amount of lines. So again, it's that creative side, right? That idea of how do you I loved that he loved it, because who wants to go on a vacation with your spouse and they hate it and they're acting like a jerk the whole time? I only tried camping once with my nerd, right? Because he'll make it miserable for everybody else if he doesn't like it. So I did that, and then he turned my son into Disney-phile, right? My oldest son was in there with it. He's obsessed with cues, like the lines. And he was like literally at 4 and 5 being like, look at how the seashell is here and how it leads you to, like, he's a perfect blend of art and nerd. And so they became Disney people, and then all they wanted to do was go to Disney. So I built more and more of the blog stuff, and then I started getting tired of writing all the time. So I started hiring other people in to write for me, who would write at Disney and Disneyland Paris and things like that. And then I started getting so tired of writing it when I would go to Disney, I started to vlog. And if I would have just freaking stayed with that, I'd probably have tons of Disney money now. But I didn't. But I would stop in the middle of the thing and do a video on, like, here's what I mean by taking this shortcut, and be able to show people, you know, where that is. And it blew up very fast.
When was this? What time?
This was, let's see, Logan was, so this would have been 2004 till about, let's see, when we adopted the boys. So that would be around 2015.
Okay, so a time when, I mean, social media wasn't even.
No, nobody was thinking about that. I had like an actual Disney blog, tips from the Disney divas, and it was great, and it was fun, and I enjoyed it, and then I sold it, which is every business owner's #1 job, is to find how the heck you're going to sell this thing amazing. And eventually get out of it.
How many Disney trips did your family take?
So my son has 27. And we have done Disneyland Paris. We've done. I've become a Disneyland fan significantly more than Disney World.
Disney World.
I feel like it has more personality, and that there's not as many angry people. I know that sounds insane, but I think it's because they've got more locals there.
Yeah.
And there's so many Disney World people there that are like, this is my once in a lifetime thing. I've got to pack it all in. And like our #1 rule, here's a Disney tip for you, is you must sleep in the middle of the day. Period. The end. You must take a break. It is always quality over quantity if you want to have good Disney trips. People will never remember how many rides you went on. They will always remember your yelling meltdown in the middle of Main Street. So our rule is you try your best to make it for rope drop, and then you sleep for 2 to 3 hours in the day and cool off. And then you pump your kid full of caffeine and you stay until the park closes, and then you do it all over again. And so like when we design plans for people, to this day I will happily write you over a plan of what you want. I just ask what your kids are into, and here's the order you need to go in, and how you need to skate around things, and now you're going to take a nap here. And
wow.
So I love it. And my husband says very often that when we finally do the retire, he'll start like his own little guide trip business down there, because he's way more chilled out about it than I am.
Yeah.
And he'll just lead people around. We won't have the little plaid vest like all the other Disney people do, but we'll find our own version of that.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. That is
so
awesome.
yeah, it's just from repeats. But now my younger kids, they've been to Disney maybe 3 times.
Okay.
But they've been to London, and they've been to Costa Rica, and they've been through the Panama Canal, and they've been through. Awesome. So eventually, Kristin said, "I'm tired of seeing Epcot's version of Paris. We're going to go see the real version of Paris."
Yeah, which is very, very different.
Yes, but again, that helps when you finally get to a point where you have money, right? So the kids, like I said all the time, that my older kids got the fun version, and my older kids got the parents with money version.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. We're in our own seasons as adults too, and sometimes our kids forget that.
That's right.
You know, they forget that, and that was something we were talking about before this. But I think it's always important just for them to have that perspective. That word perspective is probably the most overly used term in my house.
Well, and I think one of the things I've started saying in my presentations regularly is you can only parent from your perspective. Right. You only have your worldview, the experiences that you've had, what you have through from your race, your gender, your socioeconomic background, what part of the country you're from, how much, all that. You can only parent from that. And so that's why you're going to have, your parents are going to have a very different perspective on how you have to raise your children. Yeah. But one of the things I tell businesses constantly now is your new employees and the children of today are built for a world that does not yet exist. Yeah. They never are going to have to go back and survive 1985. They're never going to have to go back to hose, water, and neglect. Right? It's not going to be a thing. So they need to be able to survive 2045. So what if we spend all our time trying to tamp them down and make them into people that are from the past, then they're not going to be successful in their futures. And I think we've got a little bit of that playing out in real time in the workplace right now, where we want people to go back to rules that don't make any sense at all.
So if you want to survive, you've got to
if you don't survive, that's what I tell people all the time. You can continue your path and you'll go the way of Blockbuster, and that's completely up to you.
Right.
But I'm telling you that ones who are adaptable, who make pipelines, who start figuring out, who start making adaptions, who allow people that are under 35 to sit on their board of trustees are going to do better.
Right. Right. 10,000%. I can't agree more. Yeah. This has been awesome.
Well, good. I'm glad you had a good time. I had a good time too. Thanks so much for having me.
All of the show notes too, with links to your website and book you. I know you're booked out for probably.
I'm booked out, but I'm still January. Still got some holes. February, March, or so. We're still doing good. Go ahead and jump in, especially if you got your federal. You got to get rid of your budget by the end of October. I'm here for you, boo.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you so much.
No problem. I had a great time. Thanks so much.